The great Don Mazzella. We got to find our guest. And I think we've got our guest. We need to get Don Mazzella in here. IQ Al Rizzoli, of course, this week will not be joining us. He is on sabbatical for whatever reason. But we are going to get our guest in here, and we're going to get our co-host in here, Don Mazzella, as well. Don, can you... There he is. The great Don Mazzella. We're wearing a green shirt today. And you're not even Irish, are you? Look at the Irish.
You're really looking fancy today, Jiggy.
I'm not as fancy looking as our guest. We have got a great guest with us today. He joins us live here on our big broadcast, coast to coast and border to border on iHeartRadio and also AMFM, 247.com. Don Blankenship is Constitution Party nominee for president of the United States. The former CEO of Massey Energy has thrown his hat in the ring, and we are joined today by Mr. Blankenship. How are you, Don?
Doing fine. How are you?
Pretty good, actually. So tell me and Don about the Third Party Way plan for America and what you're doing.
Well, what we're trying to do is get the word out there that there's answers to the problems and that the country's in big trouble if we don't get some answers. And you know, the big thing, first of all, I think, is corruption in the government, what I call legalized corruption. It's a matter that the media and so forth just won't tell the truth, and it's hard for the American voters to make good decisions when they don't know the truth.
Right.
And what is the truth, in your view?
Well, the truth is that we're bankrupting the country. The truth is that we're trying to police the world. The truth is that we have let the country fall into disrepair. The infrastructure's in bad condition. The truth is that we're a divided country and that the media likes to make money off of further dividing us, that we need a situation where the truth is out there and the media needs to stop, if you will, flaming the fuel in the flames. So there's so many different things. It's really hard to talk of, but I think the big thing that people need to understand, we've elected a Republican or a Democrat president of the United States for 170 years, and we need to try something different.
Well, there are a lot of people that agree with you, but let's take one. If you, what do you consider the one or two top items that need to be done in order to put this nation on a better path?
Well, I think, again, even though it sounds vague, corruption is the first thing. We've got to have a government that cares about the American people and quits stealing from it and quits getting favors. You know, it doesn't matter who runs for president, it seems, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Biden or Trump. You know, they're accused of having done things for their personal benefit at the expense of the company, of the country. We made China great at the expense of America. The trade policy, which benefited multinational corporations, destroyed the American infrastructure, the industrial complex, and so forth. So basically, we got to reverse what we did. We got to return to the Constitution and enforce the law. And, whether that's illegal immigration or whether it's got to do with Congress having special privileges, the American public's got to quit paying to settle sexual harassment cases by senators and congressmen. There's so much detail, but the main thing is we need to send somebody up there that really cares about America, is honest, and has some sense.
Jiggy and I could not disagree. But how do we get the American people to hear what you're saying and to react to it?
That's the hardest part. You know, I had run for West Virginia U.S. Senate seat and was ahead in the election, but I'm well known as an anti-establishment guy, and I came out that I would not vote for Mitch McConnell for continuing to be Senate Majority Leader because he had overseen the deficit and the craziness that's gone on in D.C. for quite some time. And when I did that, suddenly the U.S. Senate senators, through the National Republican Senatorial Committee, decided they would make a menu list of items of how to stop me from winning the election.
Wow.
Indeed, after a nationwide debate where I was up 18 points, I was called a felon by the national media 100 times in the last 2 weeks before the election in order to keep me from winning. So today I have a lawsuit against the national
Wow.
media and the NRSC for defamation, but more than anything else, it's for causing the election to be unfair. Most people don't even know about Hill committees. The Hill committees, which are National Republican Senatorial Committee in the House, both Republicans and Democrats have one, as well as the Democratic Senate. They gather in hundreds of millions of dollars and spend it to elect the candidates that the sitting senators want to have. This is not much different than the old Soviet Union Politburo, which had a central committee that chose Communist Party members that were to their liking or they thought was acceptable. Very hard to win when the hundreds of millions of dollars are available to the sitting U.S. senators and Congress.
Yep.
Well, that's very true. But let's jump over to foreign policy. You believe that we should no longer be the policemen of the world. Am I right on this point, or did I mishear you?
No, that's exactly right. I mean, if you watch the commercials, the Navy will even run a commercial that was defending democracy around the world. The United States, citizens should not be funding the defending of democracy around the world. They should be worried about this country. One of the problems we've got, of course, is that we think that we can print money forever, and sooner or later that's going to catch up with us. And all we do, or most people do, when we go around the world trying to police it, is create enemies. We don't create friends. I don't know why they can't figure out that if you jump into a Middle East conflict on one side or the other, you actually hurt the one that you jump in to help more than you do the one that you jump in to hurt, because they become, the American friend, and being the American friend in the Middle East is not very beneficial.
Well, I don't know if you saw this, but for the first time, someone actually nominated President Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize, recognizing. Seems to me that he's done a fairly decent job of resolving some of these issues. But you believe we shouldn't be there at all. Am I hearing you right?
Well, I wouldn't predict that quite to that far. I would say we shouldn't be in 130 countries. We should be in 5 or 10. But we've got presence in military bases all over the world, and yet we don't do much. I mean, the reason that you see us step on some of the smaller countries and not step on North Korea for nuclear proliferation is because the Chinese are actually the superpower. They're the ones that can control what goes on. Their expansion in the Pacific and so forth has been a horrible thing, and it eventually will lead to worse things. At some point in time, we've got to turn our attention to the United States and have everything from good roads to harmony, and have laws that we enforce, and have criminal justice reform. The country is in really bad shape, partially because we've blurred the lines of separation between the 3 branches of government. And, it's become so political that we really don't have a government. We just have 2 political parties and a lot of opinions without any real policy.
You have a book out, which unfortunately has not yet arrived for me. What's it about?
It's mostly about the explosion. I was the president of the Massey Energy Company in 2010 when we had a mine explosion. And the explosion came just a few days after the government had required the mine to cut its air in half. And of course, you may remember Obama had declared a war on coal. And as the figurehead for coal in the United States and to some extent in the world, I was a major target of that war. And what happened is they charged me with felony charges. They couldn't convict me. They thought I would plea, I suspect, but I didn't. I went to prison, or went to trial and beat all the felony charges, and they sent me to prison for a made-up misdemeanor for a year. So I wrote a book about it. It's really incredible. They totally, it's a great example of what kind of government we've got. The mine blew up because of a natural gas inundation out of the floor, and they blamed it on coal bed methane out of the coal seam, and blamed the deceased miners for not properly ventilating the mine, when in fact the government had required them to cut the air in half shortly before the explosion. So the book goes through a lot of detail. It exposes that the government destroyed documents. They lied. They knew that what I was charged with was not a crime. They were actually trying to write a policy about what I was sent to prison for while they were doing the investigation. Make it simple for you. The biggest thing they charged me with and sent me to prison for boiled down to the coal miners telling each other that the government inspectors had arrived. And the fact of the matter is, in every industrial complex and mine in the United States, when the government shows up, the workers tell each other that the government's here. So they turned that into a federal crime, especially for me, and sent me to prison for a misdemeanor on that basis.
Wow.
The only misdemeanor in a federal prison was 2,400 felons.
Wow.
So you'll enjoy the book. It's got a lot of detail. It's got actual emails within the OMSHA where they're arguing that they didn't know it was against the law for the miners to tell each other inspectors had arrived, having shredding parties to get rid of the evidence. It's full of not just my opinions. It's mostly documents and things that the government did and said.
Well, let's go back. You're running. How are you trying to get your message across? Glad you're on this program, because. But what's your campaign like, and how could we help?
Yeah.
I think the campaign is, it's basically just to plant the seed, I call it. We're trying to plant the seed that there is a third way, that the Constitution is the way. When it comes to government, the Constitution is sort of the Bible of government. The most successful government, the most successful country in the history of the world is the United States. And while it was complying with the Constitution, it was there. So that's the message. And we are getting that word out slowly. It's going to take some time. As an individual, I basically converted West Virginia from Democrat to a Republican state. I think we can over time convert the United States to a three-party system, and the Constitution Party is the obvious right choice for that third party. And it's just going to take some time. We're in the beginning of it. The biggest thing I've got going on that I alluded to earlier, in addition to running for the president, is this lawsuit against the media. You may or may not know, or many of your listeners may or may not know, that public figures such as myself have a bigger duty when we try to claim defamation, like being called a felon when we're not. We're classified as public figures, and we have to clear hurdles that normal Americans don't have to clear. That in itself is unconstitutional, but I have cleared that first hurdle to the surprise of Fox and CNN, NBC or ABC, and the Washington Post and all of them, and now they're quite concerned. We're in the discovery stage. We've already discovered that some of them intentionally called me a felon noter, and I was not. In fact, Judge Napolitano had sent an email out that he knew what he had said was not true. And so we have them in a pretty good position at this point and expecting it to get better. And I'm hopeful that as that case moves through the courts next couple of years, that it will get some attention and play a role in cleaning up some of this media mess.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, by the way, what you're saying. Being a member of the media, I sometimes feel we use that cloak too easily, and it's just wrong what we do. But let's go back, and let me ask you this question. I've been reading over the last week what our children are reading, what our children are seeing as they grow up, and it quite frankly scares me. We're three older men right now. What we learned as young people about the country doesn't seem to be resonating in our young people. What do you say to that?
Well, we need to do away with the Department of Education and the United States government because it's spreading myths to the young people. It's ridiculous. I mean, they give Madonna almost as much space as they do George Washington in some of these school books. But we got to get back to where education is local and where it's truthful. And we've got to make sure that people that the kids are learning what great people our founders were and how well-intentioned they were, and and how important the things that they put in motion and put in place are to having a free society and having a prosperous country. And if we don't get back to that, we're in trouble. We've let the left take that away from us, and that's been a big mistake.
I couldn't agree with you more. Unfortunately, I think it's too late. We seem to have gotten away from it, from the way people are just tearing down every one of our idols. How would you stop it?
Well, again, I think all these things are not going to change overnight because they didn't get in place overnight. But you got to, if we are fortunate to get some people elected that understand and view it the way we do, we can do away with the Department of Education. We can do a lot of things. We can do away with the Department of Energy. We can start behaving physically responsible. We can quit policing the world. There's a lot of things that President Trump said he believed in. In fact, they're very consistent with the things that are in a documentary that I put out in 2014 called Reg Session. But, he has stumbled so much in his tweets and brought so much attention on himself that he's taken attention away from the very issues. It's really disappointing because he has many of the beliefs that I suspect all three of us have. But at the same time, he's sort of ruined it because of his messaging approach and some of the other things he's gotten himself involved in. If we had somebody up there that was cool, calm, and collected and did it the right way, I think he could have made a major, major impact.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Where can people learn more about the constitutional, your party and what you believe in?
Well, they can just, of course, Google Constitution Party and they'll get to constitutionparty.com. They can learn about me at Don Blankenship or Blankenship 2020 or donblankenship.com. I've been fighting establishment for a long time. I've been on the other side, if you will, global warming debate as a co-industry executive. I know what goes on. I've been around the world. I tell people half jokingly that I was born into a poorhouse, took my first shower in a mine bathhouse, visited the White House for a private dinner, and then ended up in the big house. So I've seen every element of society, the poor side, the rich side, the influential side, the incarcerated side. And it's someone like myself. It doesn't have to be me. There's a lot of good people out there that could make a big difference if they were president of the United States. But we've got to quit just voting between a Democrat and a Republican because I call it like professional wrestling. There's a good guy and a bad guy to every issue. And you watch that, and then they take your money, and then they go off and have dinner together.
You're right about that. Go ahead, Don.
But on global warming, if you're on the other side of the issue, right now in California, they're saying all sorts of things about the fires, etc. Everything that's new, we say global warming. But what's your take on this changing weather?
Well, again, the changing weather is pretty well irrelevant to the climate change, even what the scientists say, which is that it's over thousands of years. I get tickled. They'll say that proof of global warming is that we had the hottest day yesterday that we've had in 100 years. Well, 100 years ago, it was hotter than it was that day because that's still the record. And the other thing that you can see, the fallacy in their positions, is that we claimed that we're reducing CO2 emissions with our EPA and our regulations, but all we did was drive all that CO2 emission and other pollution to Asia. And Asia is part of the world the last time I looked. So it's to give you a quantification of that, in 1980, both the U.S. and China were burning about 1 billion tons of coal. The EPA and the regulations put coal down in the United States to about 600 million, but in China it's over 4 billion. So I don't know how we can proclaim that by over-regulating U.S. industry and driving the jobs out of this country and burning more coal in Asia that we're somehow lowering the temperature of the earth. The other thing that I think it's a good soundbite for that is that we're talking about congressmen and senators that can't even control the budget, and they're talking about trying to convince Americans they can control the temperature of the earth.
Yeah.
They just can't do it. And if they could do it, they wouldn't be doing what they're doing. They wouldn't be increasing CO2 emissions in other parts of the world and claiming that what it is this wealth transfer. It's not got anything to do with climate. Environmentalism is a big business, not a big cause.
Well, let me ask you this: is China a threat, a rising threat, and how would you deal with them over the next 10 years?
Well, the first thing is the customer is always right. We're the customer. So when it comes to trade policy and dealings with China, we should act like the customer instead of like the supplier. China's expansion around the world needs to be looked upon very closely because they're buying resources and controlling things throughout Africa and expanding, as I mentioned earlier, in the Pacific Ocean. We know that they have a staffed military that's 2 to 3 times as big as ours. We know that they've launched their first aircraft carriers, that they have a submarine that's faster. The thing that I pointed out that, believe it or not, caused me to be called a racist was that Mitch McConnell's sister-in-law was on the Bank of China board. She was previously on the board of the Shipbuilders Company of China, which has as a mission statement building a stronger Navy than we have in the United States. His father-in-law was at one time on that same board. We need to be concerned when the guy that's controlling the legislation in D.C. is so closely tied, his wealth and his family's business is so closely tied to the relationships we have with China. So there's a lot we need to do.
Well, what is your message? Can you sum up your message for our audience as to what you want and how you would accomplish it?
Yeah, I think the message is that we need to take out a clean piece of paper and say that we're going to live by the Constitution. We're going to do everything we can to stop government corruption. We can impose the same rules on government reporting that we're imposing on corporate reporting. We can require that corporations that are multinational be recognized as multinational by requiring them to report how many American workers they have versus foreign workers, how much of their investments American investment, how much of their tax is American tax instead of foreign tax. There's so many things that we can do that allows Americans to see the truth of what's going on. The truth of what's going on is both in China and the United States, we're making wealthy people extremely wealthy, and that we're ignoring and leaving behind Main Street. You know, everybody wonders why Main Street doesn't do well and why Wall Street does so well. It's because Wall Street has access to unpaid, unregulated labor, and it's driven all the regulated and well-paid labor in the United States out of a job. You know, it's I often make the point that there's a commonality in illegal immigration, slavery, and the trade policy, and it is that all three of those are designed to give large corporations access to unpaid labor. And as long as you have that, you're going to have poverty in the country and have a lower tax base.
You know, that's funny you should say that. I just saw something on TV 2 days ago of Middle America, the towns where I know what it was. We passed through in North Carolina, one town after another, where their main street was mostly boarded up stores, because we have the Walmarts of the world, but we no longer have that local appliance store. Would you change that?
Well, on that subject, just think about the coronavirus. I mean, they want us to maintain social distancing, but to make us all go to Walmart, Target, or Lowe's, you can't go to your local grocery store or whatever because they're shut down because of the coronavirus. It's insanity. And Walmart, of course, made their fortune off of products that are made in China without regulations and mostly closely being slave labor. It's a situation where the government has basically worked hand in hand with multinational corporations and national media to mislead the American public, and the unions have stood aside and let them do that. It's a horrible situation that can only be corrected if we change and get away from Republicans and Democrats.
Yes.
Jiggy is our guest here for a half hour or an hour?
Actually, we only have him for a couple more minutes, and then we're going to go to our next guest. Before we let you go, Don, how do we support your campaign and get involved with you, Mr. Blankenship?
Well, if you go on Blankenship 2020, you can make a donation and get a free book that's signed about Obama's deadliest cover-up. You can make donations straight up. You can volunteer to be involved. This year, because of the pandemic, we weren't able to get on as many ballots as we will next time because it's hard to get signatures when you can't get within 6 feet of somebody, and a lot of the states enforced that rule and still wouldn't make it easier to get on the ballot. But we think that the third way and the Constitution Party is the way that we need to go, and we encourage you to sign up as a member of the Constitution Party and to acquaint yourself with what we're trying to do and what we will do.
Fantastic.
Well, I will say one thing: you make a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. You.
We got a choice between a guy that makes some sense and one that's got this one that's sort of crazy and one that's got.
My wife just gave me a CNBC took a poll and said that a majority in 6 states, the majority of people thought both of candidates had something wrong with them.
Well, I think they obviously do. Like I said, one's got Alzheimer's, the other one's just genuinely crazy from the start. It's the sad part is that neither one of them's going to get the job done. There's a lot of executives out there in the United States that can do a good job as president, but the main thing you got to have is you got to have some sense and you got to be honest.